Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Midtown Scholar Bookstore. My name is Amanda, and I'm the events manager here at the Scholar. Thank you for joining us this evening for our exciting program with authors Sadeqa Johnson and Jo Piazza. Before we begin, I have to give a special shout out tonight to our partner organization, AAUW Harrisburg. We love working with you. Thank you for all your help in coordinating this event tonight. AAUW, if you're not familiar, is the nation's leading voice promoting equity and education for women and girls, and the Harrisburg branch is a dear friend and incredible partner of the Bookstore. If you haven't already, please stop by their table at the front of the store to say hi after the event, of course. Tonight is just the beginning of our 2024 event series here at the Bookstore, and we have announced many more authors scheduled throughout the year. They include the New York Times bestselling author Rebecca Searle, Dr. Keisha Blaine, and many more. Please grab an events flyer as you leave the store or stay tuned to our social media pages and newsletter for updates. And now it is my honor to introduce our speakers this evening. Jo Piazza is the international best-selling author of 12 books, including the Good Morning America Book Club pick, We Are Not Like Them, with Christine Pride. She's also the host of the critically acclaimed Under the Influence podcast. Her work has been featured in the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal, among other publications. She lives in Philadelphia with her husband and 3 feral children. Her words, not mine. Please don't cancel me. And Jo's new novel, The Sicilian Inheritance, will be released this April. I want to say a special thank you to Jo for joining us tonight all the way from Philly, and we highly encourage you to pre-order a copy of The Sicilian Inheritance from the Bookstore. They will be signed copies. You may be aware, and personalized, you may be aware that pre-orders are incredibly important for book sales, the success of new releases, and the authors behind them. So you can pre-order your copy on our website now. There are also QR codes up by the checkout. Of course, Sadeqa Johnson is the New York Times best-selling author of 5 novels. Her accolades include being the 2022 Hurston Wright Foundation Legacy finalist, a BCALA Literary Honoree, and the Library of Virginia's Literary People's Choice Award winner. She is a Kimbilio Fellow and teaches in the MFA program at Drexel. Originally from Philadelphia, she currently lives near Richmond, Virginia, with her husband and 3 teens. Of course, the book we are here for this evening is one that the Washington Post calls a triumph of historical fiction, The House of Eve. As our program director Alex always says, I just have to read one blurb. Ms. Magazine says of The House of Eve, if you've read Sadeqa Johnson's other books, you'll know her extraordinary talent for writing historical fiction that breaks the mold by challenging dominant narratives and encouraging readers to rethink their assumptions. Her latest offering is a powerfully moving story of womanhood, motherhood, race, and redemption. We are honored to welcome Sadeqa and Jo to the Midtown Scholar this evening, so without further ado, please join me and give them a warm Harrisburg welcome.
I love that there's people on the balcony. Hello up there.
Testing. Oh, okay.
All right. Okay. Yeah, this is how you talk into the mic. Alex gave us a lesson. He's like, talk directly into the microphone, please. Well, I'm just so excited to be here. I've been a huge fan of yours for a while now, and you write my favorite kind of books, which, as was mentioned, books that challenge the dominant narratives, primarily about women. I love a book that flips on its head what you think you know and what you're expecting. And The House of Eve does exactly that in so many ways. Since this is a paperback tour, how many people here have already read it?
Wow. All right, for those who did not, we're going to do our best to not spoil it for you guys, all right? We're going to keep all the little hidden gems.
This is why I ask,
Yeah.
because sometimes everyone is like, I am your biggest fan.
Yeah.
I know everything. And I'm like, oh, well, then we can do all the tea. But I'm going to be good. and I'm not going to do any spoilers. That is a lot. Sorry.
If you have a spoiler question, you can whisper it in my ear when you come in line to get your book signed, okay?
Now, I want to hear a little bit about your inspiration for this book. I heard you on Weekend Edition talking about how some of it came from your own grandmother. So yeah, talk to us a little bit about that.
Absolutely. Well, first let me say thank you guys for coming out tonight. I know that you could be anywhere on a Wednesday, and the fact that you chose to be here with us tonight is really special. As she mentioned, I am from Philadelphia. I don't think I've been to Harrisburg in like 20 years, guys. So this is pretty awesome to be here. So thank you for that. So the House of Eve, it's hard for me to talk about the House of Eve without talking about Yellow Wife. So do you guys mind if I back up just a teeny bit? So I was living in New Jersey in 2015, and I was standing in my kitchen in Springfield, New Jersey, and I heard a voice that said, "Move." And we were already looking for a new house, but it wasn't like move a county over. It was like move, like out of the state move. And it was February of 2015. I told my husband, by June of 2015, we were moved into our house in Virginia. There was no job. There was like no reason, but it was just a feeling that we were supposed to be somewhere else. And as I got my kids situated in school, at the time they were second grade, fifth grade, sixth grade, they made friends, they got into the community. I remember walking around my backyard thinking, okay, what the heck am I doing in Virginia, right? I am a city girl. Like, what am I doing here? And 9 months later, we had some friends come down to visit us, and I didn't know what to do with them. You know, when you move someplace new, you want to learn about where you are, and someone suggested that we take a walk on the Richmond Slave Trail. And on the Richmond Slave Trail is where I discovered the story of Mary Lumpkin, which is the center of the story for Yellow Wife. I was not a historical fiction writer at all. At all. Like, it never occurred to me that I would be standing up here talking to you guys about writing historical fiction. But I took a leap of faith and I wrote the book. But once the book went out into the world and it did what it needed to do, I was very clear that it was the best book that I had to offer the world. And the question that kept plaguing me was, how do you better your best? And that's a scary, scary thought. But I remember thinking about things that my grandmother told me. She told me that she was the black sheep of our family, that she had gotten pregnant with my mom at age 14, and she gave birth to her at 15. It was the early 1950s. She was unmarried. She didn't have a husband in sight. And there was a lot of shame and secrecy around the birth of my mother. My mom told me that she didn't know my grandmother was her mother until she was in the 3rd grade, because there was so much secrecy. She was raised by her grandmother, and it was never openly discussed. And I got to thinking about women like my grandmother in the 50s, shamed and pregnant, and what options did they have? What options did she have growing up in North Philadelphia when she found herself in trouble? And that thought led me to the library. Any librarians in the room? I love the library. And that was where I discovered these homes for unwed women, these maternity homes. And that was sort of the beginning, the nugget of how the story got started.
Yeah, and you write so beautifully about the shame that is often put on women back in the 50s, and frankly, that women do still carry around how we get pregnant, when we get pregnant, how we get married, when we get married. And you dive deep and don't shy away from that shame that I think has been attached to women for so long. And you started researching these homes for unwed mothers, but you were questioning what happens if you are a Black woman who is looking to adopt a child, which comes along in the other narrative in your book with a whole different kind of shame. What if you are a woman who is unable to get pregnant? I mean, it's fascinating. As women, we are damned if we do, and we are damned if we don't.
Yeah.
And you explore both sides of that coin. So who came first, Ruby or Eleanor? And actually, I'm getting ahead of myself. Tell everyone who has not read the book, because I think we're about 50-50, about Ruby and Eleanor.
Okay. So Ruby came first. I knew that she was smart. I knew that she was young. She was about 15. I knew that she had a body shaped like a Coca-Cola bottle, right? You remember those Coca-Cola bottles, right? My dad always uses that reference, like she had a body like a Coca-Cola bottle. I
You
knew,
can really picture it, though. I'm just
you
like, yeah, I'm here with
get it.
you.
You
It's-
get that.
Yeah.
I knew that she was smart and that she didn't have a lot of opportunity and that she had a mother that didn't want her. So those were the things that I knew about Ruby. When I started the story, I thought it was her story alone. And I was trying to figure out how to pull all these pieces together because, as you mentioned, when I was doing my research, I found that these maternity homes were not necessarily for Black women. They were specifically for white women. White babies were the commodity. That was what people wanted, and so they went into these homes, and it was sort of almost like a, I hate to use the word factory, but it was a system, right? Sequester the baby, separate the baby from the child, from the mother, and put the baby into adoption, and they made money off of it. But when I looked closer and I asked around, like, well, what did women of color do when this was their situation? And people often said, they went down south, they had the baby and they came back home like it never happened, or like my mother's situation, you're being raised by someone else, your sister is really your mom, and you don't know that, and you find out later. But that wasn't good enough for me because I know that when you tell a Black woman's story, it's always the singular narrative. And I knew that the story had to be bigger than that. So when Eleanor, and she literally walked into my office, y'all, I was minding my own good business. And she came and she was defiant and she was desperate and she had so much rage. And she said, I need to have a baby. And I thought, okay, hold on. I don't know where you came from, but I need a second to wrap my head around this because I do believe that characters choose you, right? And you only have a certain amount of time to say yes to them to write the story, or otherwise you're gonna go to, your local bookstore and Joe's name is gonna be on the story that you came up with.
It's true.
but
It's
you
true.
didn't write
They
it.
leave you. They are
Yes.
fickle. You think they love you, but if you don't pluck them out of the air, they're like, there's others.
There's others. Yeah,
others.
they are not loyal, right? So I said, hang on, Eleanor, let me think this through. And I remember watching Toni Morrison's documentary, The Pieces I Am. And in the documentary, she said, I didn't know that Black folks separated themselves by color until I stepped foot on Howard University's campus in the 1950s. And I thought, that's the piece that I'm missing, because I knew that Howard graduated out the largest number of African American doctors in the country. And so if I needed a wealthy family that would go to any lengths to get what they wanted, that's where I would find them. And so those were how the two characters sort of came together.
Right. And Eleanor's struggle, as we mentioned, is that she can't get pregnant and she is desperate to have a baby, but she is also a fish out of water in this world, this, Black elite society. She doesn't come from as privileged a background, and she is desperately trying to fit in, and thinks that having a baby will also help her to do that. What kind of research did you do on what this world was like at the time in the 50s?
Yeah. So back to the library, right?
Its libraries are just the best.
They are the best.
They are the
And I
best.
grew up
Yes.
in Philly going to the Logan branch like every Monday, 7 books, read a book a day, and went back. So I'm very familiar with the library. But I found a book called Our Kind of People by Lawrence Otis Graham, where he talks about the African American experience, the wealthy experience, and it's a group of people, and he could trace these families back to the 1800s, where some of them can go 2 and 3 generations back, and they were doctors and they were lawyers, but they only wanted to fraternize with each other. They didn't want to let outsiders in. And I thought, wow, well, that would really make Eleanor's life sort of tricky. If she doesn't have the last name that opens doors, but she falls in love with this guy who does. And then couple that with issues. How does that play out?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And also so many different ways of looking at motherhood. And you're a mom of 3 teenagers. You are at the opposite end of the spectrum as I am.
Thank goodness.
I mean, just we've been talking for an hour over in the Rare Books room. I've got a 6-year-old, a 4-year-old, and a 1-year-old. Guys, the Amtrak ride here was the best night of my life. I feel so good and refreshed. I mean, I started a whole new novel on that train. But I will say, I wrote books before I had kids and books after I had kids, and becoming a mother did change how I write and change my views on motherhood. And I don't think that we see enough different ways of being a mother in fiction and popular culture. And you have many different kinds of mothers in your book, not just Ruby, who is young and smart and ambitious and is not ready to be a mother, but also Ruby's mother, who does not really want to be her mother. And then you have Eleanor, who is desperate to be a mother, maybe for some reasons that are good and other reasons that are, not so good. Being a woman in the world is complicated. Being a mother in the world is complicated. How did you being a mom translate into infusing this book with so many different kinds of mothers?
I think that the story definitely pays tribute to the fact that all mothers, we are all made differently, right? But I wanted to show all sides of motherhood. So we have the overbearing moms of boys. I have a son. I'm not saying that they're right, but I do understand.
Fair. Sames. Yeah.
But you see all sides of it. And even with Ruby's relationship with her own mother, there's some deeper threads to, she doesn't want to be a mother, but there's reasons why, right? Like there's deeper reasons. And I wanted to show all sides of motherhood. There's also Aunt Marie, who takes care of Ruby in a very motherly way, even though she's not her actual mother. What I learned is that no matter what type of mom you have, particularly when you're young, you always just want that love. I think what I learned on writing this book was that mothers are always doing their very best in that moment, even if it doesn't seem like it for the child. And even if you look back, like right now I'm dealing with the fact that the House of Eve was nominated for NAACP Image Award.
Woo!
Yes, thank you. And to be quite honest, it has been on my vision board. Like I took a picture of it. Like being nominated, winning an Image Award is like the Grammys for me, okay, guys? And so it has been on my vision board. I have been manifesting it, and so I finally get nominated. And the award ceremony is on my daughter's 16th birthday. Right? So in the moment, I am going to do my very best. Now, in 5 years, is she going to be in therapy saying, my mom missed my 16th birthday? I don't know, right? but I learned that. And I also learned in writing the book that I have to give my own mother grace, right? Because even though, you know, I have all these feelings and all that you didn't, and I wanted Claire Huxtable and you were not her, she did the best that she could. And that was one of the big lessons for me that I learned on writing the book. And I am going to keep trying to extend grace. I'm going to figure this thing out. I'm going to keep trying to extend grace to myself. But as mothers, I think there is a lot of shame. There is a lot of guilt. There is a lot that comes with this job, and we all just want to do it right. And you see the different types of mothers in the House of Eve.
You do. And I loved that you included a character like Aunt Marie, who is child-free, but is mothering, because there are lots of different ways to be a mother and a caregiver in the world that do not include giving birth. And those are also women that we do not see enough of in fiction. I love what you said about giving your own mother grace. As I've been writing more about motherhood, I have also given my own mother grace that I have not for 43 years on this planet. In House of Eve, you're also writing about another hot button issue that brings with it more shame sometimes: adoption. We Are Not Like Them, the last book that I did with Christine Pride, we are also writing about adoption and the foster system. And we had to do a lot of research for that because we wanted to get it right. And during our events last June, we were here, which was so nice. We got to talk to Kate Bear, and I gave her the most awkward hug on this stage ever. I have a picture of it. I send it to her like once every few months. I'm like, remember this? But at all of our events, at least one person, sometimes more, will come up to us and say, I was in the foster system, or I was adopted. And We Are Not Like Them has a situation where a baby is abandoned, or a couple of times I was an abandoned baby, or a woman that says, I abandoned my baby. Are you meeting people that connect with this book on such a visceral level?
Absolutely, absolutely. And I would say that my mission and my purpose as a writer is to write stories where you see yourself in the book. I see my writing as a balm, as a healing mechanism, and also as a way to start those difficult conversations, because we are all walking around with these feelings, but we're not talking about it, right? And so I see my book as a way to say, oh, that happened to me, or I can identify with that, or my mom told me a story like that, you know, so that we can start having those conversations where we can heal.
Yeah, I think that fiction, as opposed to nonfiction, to be honest, is just such a great way to start a conversation, to be that balm, because you get outside of yourself. You you get to walk in that character's shoes. And walking in both Ruby and Eleanor's shoes, it's a journey. And also, the ending is complicated. I'm not going to spoil anything. This is why I checked, because the ending is complicated, my friends. And you do... But you do such a brilliant job with it. Did you always know that was how this book was going to end? Or did it come to you kind of like Eleanor did, just rapping on your door saying, hey, it's me?
Yeah, I didn't always know how the book was going to end. I had an idea. I have a feeling. I have an outline to some degree, but then I have to get out of the way and let the characters tell me their story. Because ultimately, I see myself as the conduit. I see myself as the typist, that the story has to come through me, and I have to make space for it. So, and oftentimes, what the characters want is always better than what I come up with anyway. And actually, when I finished a draft, I always get it to my agents first, and then they give me feedback before I give it to my editor. One of my agents had made a comment. I will tell you guys this. So at an earlier draft, Ruby and Eleanor never see each other, ever. And it was my agent who said, we didn't get that payoff of them connecting. And then it was like, oh, light bulb. And then I had to go back and to change a couple of things so that you got that satisfaction.
Oh, that's interesting. That would have been a whole different book, but interesting in a different way. I mean, what a conversation starter too, if they had never interacted. But I do think it's more of a payoff if you get
I think I like the ending.
Yeah. No, I mean, I'm not saying I didn't like. Said I liked the ending. I love the ending.
Joe's trying to rewrite my book.
I'm just thinking of the alternate universe where it went the other way. But it's true. I do think that the characters take over and they can write a book much better than you ever could. And I was telling you before, I'm not woo-woo about anything, but I am woo that they just swoop in and they're like, this is me, and this is the outfit that I'm going to wear. I mean, they tell me their clothes. They do. And it's so much better than anything I could wear.
And I think it's interesting. We were having a conversation earlier when you said, if you keep your, and this is for writers, tip for writers. You said, if you keep your butt in the seat, then they'll keep talking to you.
Yeah.
That's such a good way to look at it.
Yeah, because when you pause, they leave you. They do. And so it's like a muscle. You just have to revisit them every day, and then they find you. Usually in the shower.
Or in the car.
Or in the car when you don't have access to your phone. And
always when I don't have a pen.
I never have a pen. Yes. My son, my 6-year-old, has now finally realized that I don't have a pen when I need one. And so he's taken to putting one behind his ear. It's the cutest thing. And so I'll be driving and I'm like, oh, and he's like, here, Mom. My daughters don't do that for me. Boys take care of their mothers. They do. How are we on time? Are we supposed to head to... Great, perfect, because I've got 7 more minutes of questions. You mentioned that you outline. I do want to talk a little bit about process because I know that we probably have some writers here. Are you an outliner? Do you sit down and like plot books before?
I do outline. I will tell you how I did The House of Eve. So it was the first time, I think, in a long time. This is my 5th book, so I think my first book maybe I did 2 characters, but it was the first time that I did 2 characters. And the story is broken up into 4 parts. So the way I wrote it was that I wrote Ruby from start to the end of part 1, and then I sort of put that down and put it in the oven, let it bake. And then I went and I wrote Eleanor part 1. And then I would go back and look at their 2 stories and figure out where they intersected. So I did that for part 1, part 2, part 3, part 4. So that was the only way I could figure out. Every book is different, though. So that was the only way I could figure out how to wrap my brain around telling 2 stories that was one story, but to stay in the one character's head so that so she would keep talking to me.
Right,
so I wouldn't lose the thread. So that's the way that I wrote this story. But I do a little bit of outlining. I do a lot of notes to myself. It could be this, maybe it's that. Perhaps she said this. Perhaps she went there. Maybe. And then I go back and I'm like, no, she did. Yeah, she did.
That's what she did. Yeah, that's how she said that. That's the other thing that I wanted to ask you. Both Ruby and Eleanor have such distinct voices. You know, I think it is very hard to write a book from 2 different perspectives.
I thought so too.
It's
actually.
hard. It's hard. I like it. That's the thing. Like I do end up loving it, but it's not easy. And you gave them 2 very different voices. So you answered most of that you had to write one and then put her away, write one and put her away. But were you consciously thinking, and did they ever bleed over into each other?
No, I could only manage one. It's like the kids. I
like
can only manage one at a time.
I know.
I had to say, Eleanor, it's not your turn. Just wait your turn, please. Yeah.
I cannot open that popsicle for you right now, Eleanor. Nope. Now that you are writing a lot of historical fiction, do you have the bug? Do you want to keep doing it? I do. Yeah. I was telling you back there that Sicilian Inheritance is my first foray into historical fiction. I'm like, well, we're not going back. I love it. It's fun. It's great. Yeah.
Well, I also see my purpose as a writer right now, that my job is to shine a light in dark spaces and bring stories to the forefront, give a voice to those who did not have a voice, and really tell their story. So that's sort of how I see myself right now. Will it pass? I don't know.
Right.
The novel I'm working on now is another historical. So,
Yeah.
and the one that's kind of
Percolating.
just starting to
Just
talk,
over here.
just
It's right there. Yeah.
right there.
Right. Yeah.
That one
Over
feels
there.
a little historical too. So
Up in the second level.
Yeah.
Hanging out. Watch out, guys. Well, and when it comes to stories about women, and especially stories about Black women, there are so many stories that have not been told and have not been celebrated nearly enough. And
I mean, especially as, people in our country want to rewrite our history, it's even more important for me to mine around and tell these stories.
Yeah. And I think that those women, they want their stories told. I think that is why there are so many voices out there, speaking to writers today, because those women are like, you know what? This matters, and I matter. And, your work is just, letting them shout and get to be here, which is such a beautiful thing.
Thank you.
All right, I am opening it up to all of you. There's so many of you. I love how crowded it is here. Harrisburg for the win.
Yes, we will open up to questions, but first, can we have a round of applause for Sadeqa and Jo? I will come around with the microphone, so if you have a question, please raise your hand, and I will bring it to you so that everyone can hear the question.
The woman in the beautiful sparkly top.
Do you remember me, Jo? Because you came to the Flavor Book Club meeting, you and Christine, and you're going to come at some point to the
You're going to the
Club
Flavor Book Club?
in Philly.
You should.
Okay.
It is
I'm a member, but I live in Harrisburg.
It
My
is a
sister-
journey. It is a journey. It is a
It's a
great
journey.
book club. Yes.
So anyway, I don't want to spoil it for the people who didn't read Yellow Wife, but I read Yellow Wife first, and I don't know why. I got this, and I said, no, I want to read one of her other books first, and I'm glad I did, because I liked how I'll just say the green eyes. And as soon as I read that, I said, wait a minute, that was prominent, and it was not so good either. But that connection and then how it ended up, it was awesome. I loved it.
Thank you. Yeah, I knew early on that Yellow Wife, there was going to be a connection from Yellow Wife into the House of Eve. So we won't spoil it for those who didn't read, but
it was perfect.
thank you.
If you do have a question, just raise your hand.
Hi, thank you for centering complex Black women in historical fiction, especially in the 50s. I feel like there's not a lot of that, and it's not necessarily in a positive light. So thank you, Ms. Johnson. I know you said that the characters come to you, but how do you start your book? Like, how do you know when it's time?
How do I start my book? Whew, that's a good question. I feel like it's different every time. The book that I'm working on now, how did I start it? It usually, because it's historical fiction, it's usually that moment in history. So when I was on the Richmond Slave Trail and I learned the story of Mary Lumpkin, I became obsessed with knowing more about her. And so it started with a little research, and then from there it was world building, her life, like who she was and that sort of thing. With the House of Eve, because I had this idea of taking what my grandmother told me, I just saw Ruby. I saw the opening scene of her walking, like her missing the bus and, trying to get the car fare and all of that. It just played through my head like a movie. And I knew that was where I needed to begin. If I'm stuck, I start with character bios. If I don't feel like I have any plot points and it's not happening and I know who my characters are, then I'll sit down and I'll do a character bio, and that will start to get the juices flowing.
Do you ask your characters random questions that you will never include the details in the book? I happen to know like what podcasts my characters listen to. That's not in any of the books. But I do get really intricate with my character bios.
You know what I do when I start in the morning, or particularly if I've been away from them, in my journal, I do my little morning pages, my 2 or 3 pages. I'll just be like, hey, Ruby, how you doing? What you been up to? You know, I will say that sort of thing just to sort of invite them in and say, I'm here, I'm ready, what you doing? What happened last night? What you have for dinner?
Yeah.
So before you wrote your first book, did you go through any of like the imposter syndrome? Like, who am I to think that I can write a book that other people are going to want to read? Like, were you overwhelmed? You know, because you can have these ideas, and I think you've talked about it. Like, if I don't pluck them out of the air, somebody else is going to. So how do you get to that point where you're like, I can do this? What does that look like for you?
Oh, wow, that's a really good question. My first book took me over 10 years to write, and it probably was a lot of different things going on, right? But one of the things that could happen to me is I kept saying, I don't want to be a writer. I don't want to write. This is too hard. But the stories wouldn't leave me alone. They would go away for just a little bit, but then they would come back and I would be a little pissed off. And then it was like, okay, well, let me just pick up my journal. So the first book, I fought being a writer. Like, I wanted to, but it was hard and, you know, all the things. And so I stopped and I went, and I stopped and I went. But after I got the first book out, more than 10, I'm being generous. It was more than 10 years. Once I got that first book written, I worked in publishing, and I had an agent, but she couldn't sell my first book. So then I had put all this energy and time. Like, when I first start trying to get my first book published, I was pregnant with my first child. By the time my agent took it to market and came back with 10 no's, I had 3 children. So it was like depressing, right? Like, that was really like, well, what are you gonna do? And my husband was like, we gotta just do something. Like, you put so much energy into it, let's just do it ourselves. And so I took what I learned working in the publishing. I was a publicist for a few years. I took what I learned, and we started a small publishing company, and we put my first book out ourselves. And we literally went up and down the East Coast with tables and retractables and boxes of books. I had my kids in Love in a Carry-On Bag t-shirts. That was the name of my book, standing there holding it up, trying, you know, with their cute little faces, you know, trying to get people to come over to my table to buy my book. So I became invested in it at that point. And once I had done that, it was kind of no turning back, because my dream was always to be published by a traditional publishing house. My dream was always to be a New York Times bestseller. My dream was always to be nominated for an Image Award. And so it got to the point where I couldn't turn back, because then I didn't know what I would do. I kept thinking, like, well, what job can I do now? Like, maybe I could go work at a museum, but I don't have like an art history background. Like, what would I do? And then that kept pushing me.
That is such a good idea. I'm going to order Sicilian Inheritance t-shirts immediately for those children. They are so cute.
Make them earn their
They
keep.
need to be working.
Yes.
Any other questions?
Okay, you talked about like one of your dreams is about, you know, came true. Like, what's your next dream?
Well, I keep picturing myself on stage giving my acceptance speech to my Image Award. I've just been nominated, right? Now I gotta bring the award home. So I've been like laying on the bed and just practicing what I'm gonna say. I see myself in a red dress.
Have you gotten the dress
I
yet?
don't have the dress.
You have to buy the dress. That is part of manifesting this. You have to
Should
buy
I
that
walk
dress.
around and practice my speech
yes,
in the dress in the mirror at home?
100%.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's what
Yeah.
I'm working on now. And then this new book that I'm writing is stretching me. I'm overwhelmed. I'm afraid. I think I'm in over my head. I'm having what you said of who do you think you are? Like why do you think you can do this, girl? So I am having those moments now. It's historical. It starts in 1948. I've discovered a woman in history who did something really big with children. As you see, my themes are motherhood, orphans, all of that, right? And so I've discovered this woman who people don't know much about. And the book takes place here, and I just got back from Germany. I was doing research there. I've never written a book that took place in another country. Who do you think you are, girl? So I'm having to push through all of that, and I've been visualizing the book signing for the book. I got 90 pages, but right now I'm visualizing myself at the book signing, which means I finished it. They liked it. People are in the audience. So that's sort of, me.
You need to buy that outfit too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What do you think it's going to be 2026? Is it going to still be in fashion?
It should be a onesie.
Yeah. I do love a onesie. They never go out of style either.
No, never.
Yeah.
Thank you. Historical fiction writers are, so different in terms of writing. You come under a lot of pressure from all different kinds of writers. Do you ever lean on historians from the period that you're writing to double check yourself, people who are more enmeshed into the period than you absolutely could ever be in writing one book?
Oh, you just finished. This is your first historical. What was the process?
Oh my God. Sicilian Inheritance is actually based on a family story that my great-great-grandmother was murdered in Sicily a century ago. But this has been a 100-year game of telephone because we're Italian Americans, which means we are liars and storytellers. And so there are 7 different versions of how this happened. And I took this nugget of what would it be like to be a woman alone, your husband leaves to come to America, which might as well be Mars, in Sicily around the turn of the century, a woman who gets pregnant at age 14, who doesn't have many options, who has to get married, who has to be a wife because that is what you did then, but who has other ambitions. Ruby really reminded me of Serafina so much. And now in my head, Serafina is also shaped like a Coke bottle.
See?
Yeah, I know. It's such a good description.
You can use that.
Like,
Okay.
I mean, yeah, just in like the TV version when I write the teleplay, I'll be like, and she's shaped like a Coke bottle. But I didn't know that much about what life was like for women in Sicily from 1900 to 1916. So I found some people who did, and I found a lot of academics who had been writing on women's history and leaned on them and cite them in the book. And the thing that I found out is that a lot of women freaking loved it when the men left. 1 million men left Sicily, and for the first time, the women could take jobs and learn to read, and they weren't getting pregnant every 9 months. And so this was an interesting feminist time that I had no idea about until I read this academic at the University of Missouri's papers, Linda Reeder. And Linda and I have now become friends, and I'm doing a companion podcast about the true story, and Linda's on it. And so I freaking love academics and historians. Did you lean on any for the book?
For the House of Eve, I didn't lean. So I had what they call as a sensitivity read because the book took place before I was born. And there's a writer who's a mentor, and she's a teacher, and I knew she would know this time period really well. So right before the book went to print, I had her read through it to make sure that everything was sort of accurate and it made sense. The story takes place in DC in some portions, and that's kind of was her stomping ground. And so she kind of helped me tie some loose ends together and that sort of thing for the House of Eve. For Yellow Wife, because that was 1850s, I did reach out to a few historians to give me some details, lots of museums, lots of plantations, all of that.
But I think I'm always kind of scared that I've gotten it wrong. Because
I'm always like surprised when readers are like, I looked it up and you were right. It's like, oh, good.
I'm surprised too. Yeah. Yeah. No, totally. Speaking of like witchiness and woo-woo, I will say, my book is based on my great-great-grandmother, who one of the many crazy stories is that she was a witch in Sicily, a witch and a healer, and that may have had something to do with her murder. So our character, is also a healer, but I wrote a lot of the book not knowing her real story, and then I investigated her real story, and it was the same as what I wrote.
Talk about woo-woo.
Woo-woo! I know! It's crazy!
That's because
crazy.
stories are given to us.
Yes.
I mean, you're the conduit. It has to flow through you, so of course it matches.
Yeah, it's true. And maybe I'm also a Sicilian witch.
We have time for like 2 more questions. I have one right up here.
Hi. You going off kind of what you had said about how you kind of do your own kind of like searching into your family history and have to sort through all of those stories. I know a lot of us, especially women of color or people of color, it's really hard for us to trace our ancestry. And I was wondering if this kind of book prompted you to look into your own background and kind of like what tips you had for anybody who wanted to look into their background.
So, yes, it definitely did. And I felt really confident writing Yellow Wife once I discovered the story, and it was in Virginia because I had a cousin on my mom's side who did our family tree, and our roots were in Virginia. And then when I looked at my dad's side, my dad's roots were in Virginia. So it wasn't an accident that I was called home, right? I was called home to write these stories, so it made sense. I have to feel it in my body in order to write it, and I felt both of these stories were in my DNA. Like it was part of my makeup, so it was easier for me to write it. I haven't done any like ancestry too much because I have the family members who have, and I've been sort of mooching off of what they've done and put things together. But I did take names off of my family tree for both books. So in Yellow Wife and The House of Eve, I took names off my family tree as a way of paying honor to my family members.
You should mooch as long as you can, because that Ancestry subscription, that is expensive.
Hi there. I would just like to say Yellow Wife is required reading in order to be my friend. So thank you. I literally bought it for everyone I knew after I read it and cried and then read it again and then cried. So thank you for that. In the beginning, you said that Yellow Wife was your best. So you were looking to best your best. Do you feel that you accomplished that with House of Eve? And what does that mean for the future for your writing? Are you besting your next best?
So I think besting my best means pushing myself to be uncomfortable and being okay with that challenge and stretching and trying new things and not being stuck because I'm afraid. So in that respects, yes. And right now I'm in the same, I'm overwhelmed, I'm scared. I'm like, okay, you probably are barking up the right tree. So that, I always just want to get better. I always want to challenge myself. I don't want to keep writing the same stories where you're like, oh, different characters. I mean, different names, same story. I want to keep pushing and diving deeper and trying to find something that also makes me, like, I can't write it if I'm not on fire. Like, I gotta be on fire. I gotta, like, go to sleep and I'm thinking about these characters and I wanna know more. I wanna be on the journey with them. So bettering my best really is following my curiosity and pushing myself to do things that feel hard.
Any last questions? Okay, we do have a couple more minutes.
Love the idea of bettering your best.
Okay, so I'm just kind of curious so you have a little sticker on there, Reese's Book Club. So how does something like that come about? How does that work out?
We were talking about that backstage, so I'll go first, and then Jo will tell you her story too. So I was minding my own business. I was home looking crazy. It was, hair all over my head, ratty T-shirt, and my agent was like, "Hey, could you pop on a Zoom call real quick?" And I was like, usually if it's scheduled, I work from home. So I always look a mess. But if it's scheduled, I'm like, well, I'll fix myself up. But I was like, not doing it. Jump on the Zoom call. It's my agent. It's my editor. It's people I don't know. And my editor is like, we just want to tell you that House of Eve has been selected as a Reese Witherspoon pick. But the caveat is, the book at that point was coming out. It was scheduled for March. She needs you to move the book to February.
Oh, you were one of the movers.
The caveat,
yeah,
right?
Yeah.
And she said, if you agree to that, then you're a Reese pick. And I'm thinking, Reese can publish the book tomorrow. Like, whatever she needs, let's do it. So that was it. And it was probably September, October. They said, you can't tell anybody. They said, you can tell your husband. So I went and grabbed him, and he jumped into the Zoom. And so we're all celebrating. And then it was mum's the word after that. What was your story?
Yeah, similar, because it's such publisher insider baseball. The publishers submit your books to these book clubs. And it used to be 6 months in advance, and now I think it's a year in advance. I mean, it's a whole process. And I was actually going up to New York to visit my co-writer, because I stay with her when I'm in New York from Philly. And I got stuck in the subway, and I get out of the subway, and there's like 50 texts from Christine being like, I don't know, like, the agents want to get a hold of us. Everyone's trying to talk. There's some kind of emergency. And I'm like, all right, I'll be there. And I'm like running through Harlem. And I get there all sweaty and gross. And very similarly, we call, and they're like, you're a GMA book club pick. And we're like, oh, my God, that's unexpected. And but yeah, it's like a cloak of secrecy. They're like, you can't tell anyone. And this was for We Are Not Like Them, and our next book was You Were Always Mine. All of them have too many pronouns, so I mess them up all the time. But so Christine and I immediately went out to celebrate and had a lot of margaritas, and we told Tiffany, the bartender. But we're like, Tiffany, you can't tell anyone. And she didn't.
Thank God.
Thank God. We woke up the next morning, and like our agents were like, they're really serious about this thing. And we're like, you did? And we're like, we didn't tell anyone. No. But it's an amazing honor. We were just talking about it. It's hard for readers to find books these days. There's so much content out there that it's nice to get to be able to get that boost and find ways to meet more readers, because we don't all have such incredible independent bookstores in our town.
Well, with that, can we have a round of applause for Sadeqa and Jo?